on Saturday, or maybe you pre-polled as well, but numbering every box in the election this time around, were you swayed at all by the party's how to vote cards, the advice from the parties about how you should number each box, you know, where you should put your number 2, your number 3, and so on? Well, one community group on the Sunshine Coast has assumed that you would be swayed by how to votes and jumped in and says that it's proved itself a new grassroots force in politics. John Bolton is the spokesman for Rite-On. John Bolton, what is Rite-On? How do you describe yourselves?
In our publicity, we describe ourselves as a new national, non-party, partisan grassroots community group that supports conservative Australian values.
So what issues are the defining issues for your group?
Rite-On has been sitting there as a registered name, as the sort of activist arm of this group. We intend that it be rolled out to compete with groups like Get Up, which clearly are well funded and support the left-wing groups. And so when the election came about this time, we've been watching it very closely and were dismayed that our number crunchers put into the various electorates and found that wherever One Nation stood and did not preference the sitting Liberal National Party member, it would result almost certainly in the Labor Party winning that seat, even though they might have fewer primary first preferences than the Liberal National candidate. So we set about doing something about it.
And so, John Bolton, what are the issues that your group's most worried about when it comes to a Labor government?
Well, this generally is conservative Australian values. So if you speak to members of the group, they come from various backgrounds, and our How to Vote card, in fact, supported on one side, or showed how to vote for LNP on one side, and how to vote for, if you were going to vote for One Nation, to put your second preferences to LNP. So it wasn't a single issue, but this group has lobbied variously over things like same-sex marriage, over things like safe schools, over things like mosque planning and the need for community input into where mosques go.
Sorry, did you say mosques there?
Mosque, as is Islamic centres of ideology, yes.
Okay, and when you say your members come from a variety of backgrounds, I did read in one newspaper report that you have about 1,000 members. Is that right?
Yeah, 1,000 actual paid-up members. That's just in the Sunshine Coast area in the initial stages. In fact, the Sunshine Coast areas become quite large, and there are now 4 other local groups ranging from as far north as Mackay and down to Moreton Bay. And there are other seeded groups in other states as well.
And how much do you have to pay to join?
I'm certainly happy to promote our membership if you like. Initially, you will be provided documentation, and you need to not subscribe to any particular party because this group doesn't do that. It's generally more conservative. I think the current membership is around about $10 or $20 per annum.
And so when you say that you're a non-party partisan group, non-partisan as well, does that hold true really when you look at the fact that you have gone deliberately against a Labor candidate? The
group has gone in favour of candidates that stand up for conservative values. So when you say against Labor, I guess you could say against left-wing as well. Against the Greens, you could say that, certainly. In fact, the Julie McGlone at the Maroochydore pre-poll actually became quite angry and made complaints to the Electoral Commission about the How to Vote cards. She was found her complaint wasn't upheld, and then she actually went into an abusive tirade, which resulted in a complaint being made formally to the Electoral Commission about her behaviour.
Okay, well, perhaps we won't into that.
Well, she was removed from the booth for the rest of the day, so that was how bad her behaviour was.
I can't really go to her now for reaction on that, but, you don't want to be risking defaming anybody here, John Bolton, I'm sure. But I'm
a barrister and a solicitor and public notary. I'm quite happy to assert truthful things.
And so you've targeted with Rite-On the seats of Maroochydore, Caloundra and Glasshouse. How did you actually target those seats?
Well, first of all, we had to come up with a plan that we could manage with the resources available, and that means obviously person power, boots on the ground, as well as sufficient money to be able to fund the plan. So there was no grandiose across the state plan. So we targeted 3 seats initially: Caloundra, Glasshouse and Maroochydore. And subsequently, other volunteers came on board, and we also had people out at Toowoomba, where we also succeeded in retaining the Liberal candidate, even though a 10% swing against him was expected. The most obvious case, which was successful, was Glasshouse, where we started off targeting 6 major booths, and because volunteers came on board, we ended up staffing 8 of them on election day. And in every one of those booths that we staffed, the One Nation second preferences flowed to Liberal National. In every one of the booths that we have results from so far that weren't staffed by us, the preferences flowed something like 75% towards Labor. So we say that's indicative, and we don't actually have to do any bragging ourselves, because the state Labor campaign manager said that they could not get any more than 40% in any booth which Rite-On was staffing and handing out our how-to-vote cards.
John Bolton, I've read as well that your group Rite-On now plans to target certain seats in every election going forward. So is this the plan now?
Well, the spokesperson, Gary Graham, was questioned about that in a previous media interview, and that was put to him, and he was more circumspect than that. What his answer was, that we would certainly be watching. There is no point in us going to a well-secured seat of either description, so we targeted marginal seats where we believed we could be effective as a grassroots community group, because we were feeling that Liberal Nationals really had no answer to the problem that One Nation was going to be causing them when they were preferencing Labor above them. And we've seen this in other seats like Mansfield, Mount Omni, Aspley. We were a bit late out in Redlands. In fact, our cards were confiscated in Redlands by the Electoral Commission, but after I telephoned them, the cards were handed back because they were perfectly lawful, and the electoral booth operators were instructed not to confiscate anymore. So that may well have affected efficacy in Redlands.
Okay. John Bolton, thanks very much for your time this afternoon.
Thank you very much.
Spokesman for the community group Rite-On, calling themselves a community safety group, and also Rite-On Action for Oz on social media pages. So one to watch, 5:28.